staff writer for the Weekly Standard, Michael Warren, taking some time out of his day. Michael, good morning to you.
Good morning to you guys. How are you?
We're doing very well. You're keeping your eye on what's going on with Senate races and some interesting stuff this morning.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's always some new information about these Senate races, and everybody's sort of watching, what's going to happen, who's going to be in control. Republicans look pretty well situated for taking over, but I think there's going to be some surprises that we aren't necessarily expecting.
Mike, if we look at maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a 3 or 4 day polling release, 3 or 4 days of polling releases, in which things were looking better for Democrats. There was a lot of talk about, they're not going to get it. Republicans can't get the majority. Everything's looking good for Democrats, and that stopped almost immediately. And we've had a couple of weeks now where Republican polling has been very good, and in fact, the past 2 or 3 days, my goodness, you're seeing polls out of New Hampshire with Scot Brown up. You see in North Carolina, in Colorado, Cory Gardner's been up at, I think, 7 of the last 8 Colorado polls. Tom Tillis is polling better in North Carolina. This is, let me ask you, do you think right now, today, is perhaps the best outlook for Republicans on November 4th in recent months?
I think so. I mean, you make the point about a couple of weeks ago hearing about those Democratic polls, oh, wow, Democrats are ahead or maybe not as far behind as we thought. The key for watching any of these polls, particularly in these last few months and weeks, is to look at trends. There might be one poll that shows a Democrat ahead or Republican far behind, but it could be an outlier. It could be a trendsetter. It could be telling us something that is happening, but oftentimes it can tell us about some sort of statistical noise. So I agree that you're looking at the direction, the momentum in so many of these races. It's all on the Republican side, even in some places where I think Republicans are having more trouble than they thought they would, particularly in North Carolina. Things are starting to move in that direction, and you're starting to talk about states like New Hampshire and Scot Brown, maybe even Virginia and Ed Gillespie, where Republican side those are reaches at best.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have to see what happens in these last 2 weeks, but I do agree with you. The momentum is in the Republicans' direction, and it really hasn't been as good for Republicans as it is right now.
Michael Warren with us, staff writer, Weekly Standard, weeklystandard.com. Now, all that being said, your most recent piece just up this morning at weeklystandard.com is about the Georgia Senate race, where I think this is the first time that Michelle Nunn, the Democrat, is in a poll at least ahead of David Perdue in that U.S. Senate race. What's happening on the ground in Georgia?
Right, that's the first poll really in a long time that showed Nunn ahead. I think she was ahead a few times over the summer, but I think the Republicans are in trouble in Georgia. I'm a Georgia native myself, so I feel like maybe I have my ear to the ground a little better than some of these other states. But Georgia is a changing state. It's not a solid red Republican state. It was, after North Carolina, the closest state that Mitt Romney won in 2012. It's got a growing minority population. It's got a growing population of people who weren't born in the state, who are coming from states where they vote Democratic. So I think this is a real tough seat for Republicans to defend. It's an open seat that Saxby Chambliss is vacating, is retiring. And if Democrats can capture this, and I think Michelle Nunn is maybe the best Democrat right now to do that, then that doesn't bode well for Republicans in Georgia in the future. I will say, though, that there is a high possibility that Georgia goes to a runoff. In Georgia, and as a bunch of the southern states, if the winner doesn't get 50% of the vote, then they have to go to a runoff. And this runoff would be in January. It's looking possible that that's the case. I actually think that if Nunn push it and Perdue go into a runoff, the Republican Perdue has a better shot of winning in January in that runoff. But this is a surprisingly tough spot for Republicans. We'll have to see if any of these polls show more momentum for Nunn.
Spending some time with Michael Warren from the Weekly Standard, talking Senate races and all that. You mentioned some surprises that you thought we might see come Election Day. You want to tip us off on what some of those surprises might be?
I think we have to watch New Hampshire. I've been following Scot Brown for years now, and he's a excellent retail politician. He has been sort of within single digits of Jeanne Shaheen, the Democrat, there for several polls, and then of course yesterday the release he found him ahead by one. I really think he's made this race about national security issues, about immigration concerns with illegal immigration, and that's really put Jeanne Shaheen on the defense. It's still a Democratic state. It voted for Obama in 2008 and in 2012, but Republicans can do pretty well there. They already have a Republican senator there, in Kelly Ayotte. So I think that's one to watch. And also you should watch Virginia and New Jersey just to see what's happening there against Cory Booker and Mark Warner, the incumbent Democrats. They're under fire a bit.
Michael Warren with us from the Weekly Standard, weeklystandard.com. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. Let's talk about a couple of more states here. Kentucky. Can we put the nail in the coffin there? Allison Lundergan Grimes, the Democrat, has refused to say who she voted for in 2012. She's getting piled on by even Democrats, and now the DSCC has, pulled all their fundraising, or not all their fundraising, pull all the money, though, for advertising out of Kentucky. Is that race done?
I think so. There was a question about, is the DSCC pulling their money out so that a Democratic PAC can put their money in? Some of the coordination there, and that's actually not the case. The majority PAC, Senator Reed's PAC, is also pulling out there. So I think she's done. She's not that far behind Mitch McConnell, but she's also topped out. I don't think she has any more votes to get. And that embarrassing, she's not able to say who she voted for in 2012. I want to know, is she going to vote for herself in 2014? That'd be a really good question to ask her.
She's still weighing that, Mike. She's still kicking that one around in her head. Can't really come up with an answer for you, but, she's leaning that way.
Exactly.
Kansas. Pat Roberts, longtime U.S. Senator in the state of Kansas. And for a while, the independent Greg Orman, who kind of is the Democrat in disguise in that race, has been up. But we've seen polling again in the last week or two showing some real momentum behind Pat Roberts. And it's even spilling over into the gubernatorial side of things, Michael, where Sam Brownback thought to be in jeopardy of losing his reelection bid. I've seen him up in a couple of recent polls. Is that momentum shift toward Republicans in Kansas real?
I think it probably is. There is a sense in Kansas that Republicans were really letting things get away from themselves, and it really has to do with the fact that it's kind of a one-party state, and this was the consequence of some inter-party fighting. People who thought Sam Brownback was too conservative and said they weren't going to vote for him. People who said Pat Roberts went too far to the right in his primary and so they weren't going to vote for him. I think Greg Orman has revealed himself to be maybe not the serious thinking centrist that he is, but maybe more of a political opportunist. I do think Republicans come home on this. Kansas hasn't elected a Democrat to the Senate since I think the Roosevelt administration, the second Roosevelt administration. I'd be very surprised to see Democrats or an independent in Democrat in independent clothing pull this one off.
What do you see when you look into your crystal ball for Iowa?
I think Iowa's really, really good for Republicans. Joni Ernst is maybe the best Republican candidate that came out of this cycle, and Bruce Braley has a lot of problems. It's not just that he makes a lot of gaffes and he talks about disparagingly about farmers from Iowa, but he's also tied to the Obama administration, and I think this is a good pickup for Republicans here. All the momentum again is on Joni Ernst's side, but it's also going to be close. So I give her this, but very close, maybe 1 or 2 point race.
Michael Warren with us from the Weekly Standard, weeklystandard.com for his coverage of the Senate races and more. The seats that everyone expects to flip, Montana, West Virginia, South Dakota, not a lot of discussion about whether those might be upsets for Democrats. Looks like they will be Republican takeovers. Then the next three, you got Louisiana, Arkansas, and Alaska. Mark Begich, Mark Pryor, Mary Landrieu. Those seem to be the next three that Republicans think they can pick off. How confident should they be in their chances, Republican Senate candidates in those states, of their chance of winning in those three respective states?
First, I want to say real quickly, your listeners may be hearing things about South Dakota. Democrats are putting more money in. I think that's a feint. I don't think that they've got a shot. The Republicans troubled there, but I think Mike Rounds pulls that off. In those three states that you mentioned, the Alaska, I think Mark Begich is pretty much done. Mm-hmm. He's been down by 7 or 8 points in these polls. Arkansas, I think Tom Cotton has struggled early on to define himself, but he's been leading the last several polls, and I think he's got that. Landrieu is a tough one because this is actually what's happening in November is a primary. Louisiana's open primary system. So it's likely we're going to see a runoff there between her and Bill Cassidy, because there's a Republican candidate, Rob Maness, who's sort of running as the very conservative candidate. He'll pull some votes from Cassidy, and so we'll go to a runoff in December. I actually think that Landrieu is in better shape to win her runoff than none in Georgia is. I think Democrats will invest a lot if it means winning that, keeping that majority. But I do think that given Colorado and Iowa and some of these other states, it's likely that it will go to Bill Cassidy. And again, the momentum is on the Republican side.
Well, Mary Landrieu has really turned herself into a somewhat conservative during this election cycle. It's going to be a weird snap of the neck for Louisiana folks if she wins and bounces back to her normal self.
Right, exactly. And maybe they'll stop seeing her around the state and she'll be returning to her home here on Capitol Hill a lot more. So, yeah, I don't know. I do think that Landrieu is in real trouble, and she's the state's just becoming less democratic, and she's going to be, I think, the biggest casualty of that trend.
Michael Warren with us, staff writer, Weekly Standard, weeklystandard.com. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. Before we let you go, Michael, a strategy question. Cory Gardner in Colorado, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, and I think there's at least one other candidate. He or she not coming to mind. Well, it would have to be a he. You'll see why in a moment. The birth control issue. Cory Gardner, I think, was first to try to blunt the attacks by saying, let's take this totally out of, pull it apart, just make it available over the counter. And Tom Tillis has said the same thing. Has this been an effective strategy thus far for those candidates? Do you think more Republicans might take that tact as we move closer to the election day this time, or even toward 2016?
I think it's been a good, so far it's been a good political strategy to sort of take an issue away from the Democrats and kind of surprise people. And I think the Democrats have succeeded in convincing people that Republicans are just against contraception, which of course is ludicrous, but it's an effective message. So the idea that Republicans are saying, we'll just make it over the counter, insurance doesn't have to pay for it, kind of takes the issue off the table. And I think in Colorado specifically, that has helped Cory Gardner in a lot of ways fight against the war on women rhetoric. But let's not forget that Mark Udall, the Democrat, has dug himself a hole on this. He's gone so maximalist on issues of abortion. I mean, the question about third trimester abortions is pretty much settled in the United States. The people don't like them. They don't like the late-term abortions, and I think he made a mistake by essentially endorsing late-term abortions and saying that he doesn't have any problem with that. And I think he's painted himself as an extremist in an attempt to make the Republican Cory Gardner look like one. So Democrats, I think, have exhausted their war on women rhetoric in a lot of these states. But of course, we'll have to wait to see if how the exit polls look with women, particularly with married women, how they respond to this issue.
He's Michael Warren, staff writer for the Weekly Standard, and obviously a guy who knows his stuff. Mike, thanks for taking time for us this morning.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.